Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone, and welcome to the Muslim Women Wellness Podcast, where we focus on the dynamics of the modern Muslim woman. This is a space created by women for women to support you wherever you are on your wellness journey. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Farah, and we're your hosts, two sisters in faith, navigating life, identity, and purpose in a world that often misunderstands who we are. So every Thursday at 12 p.m., we're going to come together to support, uplift, and inspire each other to live empowered and fulfilled lives, inshallah.
Inshallah. We are so grateful for your presence today and excited to grow together and build a community that reflects the beauty and the complexity of who we are.
So grab your tea, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Bismillah. So inshallah today our focus is on redefining our identities from a place of authenticity. We will explore what it means to define yourself on your own terms and honor your uniqueness, because we are all unique in our own individual way. So we'd love to explore that further today in regards to our identity and how that's shaped. So inshallah, we would love to start by asking a question.
Yeah, so assalamu alaikum, everybody. So first we want to kind of get a sense of who is tuning in today. So feel free to introduce yourselves in the comments. And you can start with something as simple as, where are you joining us from? And we'd also love to know more about you. So what are the ways that you tend to describe yourself? What's the first thing you think when you think about yourself? So let us know that in the comments. And meanwhile, I'm actually tuning in from Tampa, Florida today.
Yes, and I'm from New York City. So it's pretty amazing that, Sister Danielle is from Tampa and I am from New York City, and we're able to connect on this platform and then connect with all of you from different parts of the world. So we'd love to just know more about, where you're coming from. And, sometimes where we are coming from kind of shapes our identity, especially, from New York, being from New York City. There's just so many different identities I see every day. Walking on the streets, on the way to New York City Muslim Center, at the Masjid Isa bin Maryam. There's just so many identities that come into the center, just in that one little spot. So it's really beautiful to see kind of the melting pot whenever I'm around the masjid. And just being in New York City is just a hub of different identities.
MashaAllah, yeah, it sure is. It's really interesting being in Tampa because this is the South, right? So there are a lot of stereotypes about what it's like in the South. And some people are actually afraid in the beginning, if they're Muslim or they're visibly Muslim, or not, born in the South, they can feel a little bit nervous about being judged about who they are, being here. But it's very interesting because Tampa itself is also becoming a melting pot. So there's a lot of diversity. And that's a great kind of basis for, discussing this concept of identity. And I'm seeing in the comments, alhamdulillah, we have people coming in from New York, people coming in from Tampa, and then, telling us more about themselves. So I see someone here, Sister Ruby, saying that she's from Tampa, but she's a proud Muslim. So, this is a way of identifying yourself. It's something a way that you think about yourself, a way that other people may perceive you as well. And then we have here Sister Debbie saying that she's a nurse. So that's another way that we tend to identify ourselves, right? Like by our professions, the activities that we do in our lives. So continue sharing your comments, where you're from, tell us more about you, and let's get into it.
Inshallah. And yeah, it's pretty amazing how we can all have these different identities, but for example, as you mentioned, like Ruby said Tampa, and Sister Debbie said Long Island, New York. But you guys both said you're proud Muslims. You guys are both proud Muslims. So that's kind of, the way you guys are connecting right here in this chat, is that you guys are both proud Muslims, even though one is from Tampa, one is from Long Island, New York. But, something that kind of connects us is that we're proud Muslims. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more on, what this kind of means for us, what identity means, and, why is it important to talk about identity. So when we think about identity, and if if we dig deeper into it, we can kind of break it up to into different categories. And some of these categories you might be used to, some might be a little new, but we're discussing these different categories to kind of like verbalize the meaning of identity and help us understand the different layers identity has. So we do have personal identity. That's one category. So personal identity is your story, your strengths, your struggles, your unique qualities, experiences, life stories that distinguish you from other individuals. And it can be so many different layers, and it's filled with so much uniqueness, because it's your personal identity and your personal struggle and strengths and experiences that can be completely different from others, but also can be very similar. And then we have social identity. So social identity is when you can feel a sense of belonging to different groups, such as a professional group, ethnic group, or a religious group. So it can be being Muslim, that's a social group. Being American, being a teacher, a parent, a mother, a father, a student, or just being in a professional field, like Sister Debbie mentioned she's a nurse, so that's a professional field. So you probably feel like you have a nurse group that you connect with, that you identify with. So that's our social identity. And then we have collective identity. So collective identity is a shared sense of belonging to an even broader group or humanity. So it can just being identified with the global ummah and to humanity. And this really gives us a strength and responsibility, because we can connect to a global group of people. So for example, like Muslims in other parts of the world, we feel we connect to them because of our collective identity as Muslims, and just being on the same kind of humanity, and we share similar values. And then we have cultural identity. So this is an individual's understanding and connection to their cultural heritage and traditions. So it can be like our languages, our foods, customs, traditions, and how do we relate to other people in our cultural identity and our cultural group. All of these different types of identities and categories kind of shape us into who we are and make us wholesome. And sometimes they're very different, sometimes they connect, but definitely that's something we're going to explore further as we go in.
Yeah, and I think it's so exciting to have this conversation specifically around Muslim women, because we have really a different experience when you think about it being in the United States. Like, our community is so diverse. So when you're when you were mentioning all the different categories, it's so interesting because there's so much intersectionality. Like each one is very different. Like someone who's a nurse, if you're working in a hospital, your community of nurses and doctors is going to be so diverse in a different way, versus like when you're at the masjid, for example, with a group of women, Muslim women, there may be people from all different countries, with all kinds of different cultural backgrounds, people who were born here, people who are immigrants, there's just so much variety. So I really think this is such an important discussion for everyone to kind of engage with. But I think it's even more fascinating for us, just because we are such a diverse group here. So I wanted to kind of talk about, it's great to look at the levels of identity and talk about these different categories. And giving you guys that chance to kind of introduce yourselves and think about, like, who am I? Like, how do I see myself? If someone asks me about myself, what words come to my mind? How do I describe myself, right? But it's really important to understand why this matters. And so, there's research showing actually that when you have a strong sense of identity, that it's a buffer against external influence. So, we've maybe been there before. We've seen people who are very easily influenced by their external environment, by the opinions that other people have of them, by comments that people may make about them, and they kind of feel unsure of themselves. So this is a really great way, like by defining our identity, choosing our identity, and being aware of what we align with as our identity, it will help us be so much more confident in the world and less threatened by comparison. and
Mm-hmm.
negative self-evaluation.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and it really will give us an internal reference for our own self-worth, right? So I love already, like from the comments I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is that people do already have a pretty strong sense of identity in many different ways. And what I think, you're highlighting, Farah, when you're talking about the different aspects of identity,
Mm-hmm.
in one sense, it's demonstrating how malleable identity actually is. So
Yeah, and to have like fluid, it's like kind of always changing.
it can always be changing, right? And so that's something actually I want to ask you guys now in the audience. Like when you think about who you are, do you think of it as something that is fixed, like I am this way, this is who I am, and it's permanent? Or do you feel or believe that it's something that can be fluid and changed?
Yeah, like for example, Maimuna mentioned that she's a mom, that's her identity, a caregiver and childcare provider. So I would love to explore that more, and if you can comment say and let us know, how do you how does identity make you feel, and is this a recent identity? Have you always felt this way, or was this something that just came a few months ago, a few years ago? How did you feel a few years ago? Did you still feel like this was your identity, or is it because now you're more into being a mom and a caregiver that identity has changed? So I'd love to know more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm curious as well, like when we think about the levels of identity, there was the one that you mentioned first, the personal
Mm-hmm.
identity, right? And I think we often think more about the other ones, right? Like I'm a nurse, I'm a Muslim, I am a student, I'm a mom, I'm a
Yeah.
woman. And those are more in the social, collective, and cultural realm, right? But what about the personal realm, right? What unique
Yeah.
qualities do you have? And this is like, I feel like we don't spend a lot of time on this, or if we do it in a very sort of critical way. Like, I'm not good with names. I'm not so good at this. I'm not at this. I'm not at that, right? So I want you guys in the audience to kind of think about that, like your personal identity. How do you see yourself as a person? If we took away the collective, the social, and the cultural labels, how do you see yourself? And
Yeah.
it's really important, I think, to think about what your strengths are. That's one way to start to craft that personal level of identity. And most people shy away from that.
Yeah, and it is interesting. Like, if you think about like how we have conversations with each other, when you meet someone new, what do people usually talk about? They'll say, "Oh, I'm a mom, I'm a teacher, I'm a college student." They really focus on that collective identity or social identity. Like you mentioned, personal identity is usually kind of it's like buried a little deeper. It doesn't come to the surface when we talk or have conversations, and that's interesting and something I think we should all reflect on why is that personal identity not coming out? Why do we feel like we can't discuss our unique qualities or experiences and life stories when we talk to each other? Or why can't we define ourselves through our personal identity and our strengths? And you also mentioned that sometimes we use the negative parts of our personal identity, like if we and kind of like fixate on that. Like, if we can't remember someone's name, then we're like, we think negatively, like, oh, we just have bad memory, like we this is just who we are now. We can't remember people's names, we can't remember faces, and that becomes like the negative parts of our personal identity kind of comes out, and we use that and it becomes our identity.
Exactly. And the fascinating thing is that when we think a certain way about ourselves, it will actually impact the way we feel. And then the way
Mm-hmm.
we feel is going to impact the actions that we take.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then that is what gets us results in life. So I love
Exactly.
Ruby mentioned that she's very caring and kind. So this is definitely like a deeper level. This is a personal, a way of identifying yourself on a personal level. I am a caring person. If you believe you're a caring person, the actions that you take are going to be congruent with what you believe about yourself. So if you believe you're a caring person, when you take actions that are uncaring, you're going to feel that misalignment. And that makes it so much less likely for you to make uncaring decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we think about ourselves, for example, like I am not a person who's good with remembering names, right? If that's what I
Yeah.
believe about myself, whenever I meet people, it's going to be that much harder for me to remember their names versus if I say to myself, I'm someone who tries, who is committed to working hard to remember other people's names because I believe it's important, right? Then the way that I
Exactly.
approach meeting people is going to be so different.
Yeah, and this goes back to how our identity really shapes us. And redefining that can redefine how we live our lives and how we interact with others and how we can accomplish our goals and and become the best version of ourselves. Because if we limit ourselves by always like focusing on the things that we're not good at, or just on one identity, if it's just our cultural identity or just our religious identity, or just our being a mom or being a student or being a teacher, then we limit ourselves to all the different layers that we can unlock and become more powerful in. So it's definitely something that is important. That personal identity is something that's so important, especially when you frame it in a positive way. All the different layers of you, and focus on the positives and not on the ones that you are think negatively about.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole reason that we're starting this entire podcast on this topic of identity because it is so foundational. It is really the basis upon
Mm-hmm.
which you build your actions, your relationships, and ultimately like the success or failures that you experience in life are related back to your beliefs about yourself. So that being said, so far, I would love in the audience for you guys to comment what are some of your strengths? And if it's hard for you to think about what, the positive things that you believe about yourself, that's not a problem. You can kind of look towards the future. Like what kind of person would I love to be? If I was like my ideal self, what are the qualities that I want to have? Right? What are the qualities I would love to build my identity with? And that is a great starting place versus, feeling like you're limited by the way you see yourself today. You can start to look to the future of like, how would I really like to be? What are qualities I love about other people that I would love to start inculcating and embodying myself? So please share with us either your strengths or qualities, identity qualities that you love about maybe someone else in the world or that you would love for yourself
Mm-hmm.
in the future. And then we'd love to hear those there. And then I would like to get back to, Farah, when you were really getting
Mm-hmm.
into how we often derive our sense of self from our group memberships, from these broader categories of like, our professions and, our gender and things like that.
Yeah.
Muslim women are I think in also a unique position regarding this, right? Like we're the intersection of like our gender, being a woman, and then being a Muslim, and then for many of us listening today, being a Muslim woman in a majority non-Muslim country. Like all of this impacts how we feel about ourselves. And so we can be very
Mm-hmm.
susceptible to those external sort of stereotypes, even when they're not voiced. So just having the feeling that someone else is looking at you in a certain way or believing something about you can have an impact on your thinking and your emotions in the moment.
Yeah, and it can be very limiting when you feel like you are in this box or this label. And the one purpose we have for this episode and for talking about identity is to remove ourselves from those boxes. And these boxes were created by stereotypes or societal pressures or family pressures, expectations. These boxes were not created by us. It was kind of just created by the outside world, external factors. And then we kind of just stuck in this box because we had no, we didn't have that empowerment to break out of that box. So we definitely want to discuss more on, how can we break out that box and who is creating that box? Because once you figure out like where those boxes are coming from, then we can slowly break away from it and remove ourselves from being in those labels and those boxes. So Danielle mentioned that stereotypes like Muslim woman stereotypes, especially being in America and being in you know, a different, not a, you know, Muslim majority country, that can create like some stereotypes. So I'd love to know, you know, if in the comments, like, you know, what are some stereotypes you've heard, or has anyone told you a stereotype, or, you know, told you directly that they expected you to be this way because they heard this about Muslim women, or and then, you know, you were kind of taken aback, and then you started to believe it because like, you kept hearing it, and that created the box even more and made the box even deeper. So what are some things that you've been told? I would love to hear in the comments.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that too. And let's just take a second though to go through some of the comments that have already been put down here, because people are saying just wonderful, amazing things that I'd love to highlight. So, you know, the audience is showing what it's like to actually start to craft your identity, you know, with positivity, with self-belief. And so I'm seeing things like I am strong, I'm empathetic, I'm honest, I'm able to handle situations, right? So there's so many positive things here. I'm helpful. Now imagine what kind of actions spring from those, you know, that sense of self, like a sense of self where I'm helpful, I'm empathetic, I'm giving, I'm strong. And then I want to point out a couple things that I'm noticing here as well. So we talked about like, well, what do you admire about others and you know, that you would like to aspire to? And so Maymuna mentioned that her brother is a successful self-made businessman, and she admires that about him and aspires towards that. So what might you say about yourself, right? If that's something that you aspire to, and everyone can take a moment to do this, like think about something that you aspire to be, and how might you kind of speak to yourself about that today, right? What words might you use? What sentence might you say that would kind of help you move in that direction? And an example is the one, I like to use this example. It's so simple and a lot of people can identify with it, but just, you know, the I'm not good with names one. So if I wanted to shift that, and I see other people remembering other people's names and having these great conversations and feeling so at ease and never having that awkward moment of like, can you spell that? You know, when they're trying to put the phone number into their phone. You might say about yourself, like, again, I'm working really hard to remember names, or I prioritize remembering people's names when I meet them, you know? And so that's a way to kind of start to shift from one identity, which you want to move away from, towards the identity that you want to create. So let's see what we got. Okay.
If he can do it, I can do it. I
Nice.
love that. Maymuna.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Good. I love that. Awesome. And then there was one more I saw that said something about I wish. Oh, I can't go back up to it.
Let me see.
But I wanted to just talk about the language that we use, right? So really what we're talking about is so interesting because we're talking about
I just wish
found
I
it?
could be more I just wish I could be more consistent with goals I have for myself.
Okay. So that's a really good one, right? Because first of all, when we use every word we use matters, right? And that's why this topic matters so much. Like why does it matter your identity? Can't you just take actions and do things in the world, and you know, you wake up in the morning, you get things done? Really, all of those actions are coming from, they're connected to what you believe about yourself, and what you believe about yourself manifests in the way that you talk to yourself, talk about yourself, even in your thoughts, right? So for example, we often say like, I wish I could be like this, or I wish I could be like that. And that's actually could be disempowering, right? Because wish is kind of like a word that puts the responsibility outside of ourselves. And so let's try to reframe that one. Like, how can we say that differently? Instead of I wish I could commit, can we rephrase that into something that is more actionable, more powerful, and more aligned with who you want to be? And it might be something as simple as, I'm willing to work on being committed. You know, sometimes the language can just if we're starting in a place where it's really difficult for us to see ourselves in a different way, we can start with just willingness. Like, I'm willing to change. I'm willing
Yeah.
to work at being committed or committing to something. I'm planning to. Okay, that's good. And planning kind of puts it out in the future as well.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like there's no date there. So if you're planning to do something, like, when are you planning to do that? Maybe come up with a time frame for that one. And I'm saying that because someone posted that in the comments as well. I will
And
be more
also
physically fit and healthier, inshallah. Yes.
and yeah, and also it's so important and powerful that you have a wish, that you're able to acknowledge that what you want to accomplish. So the fact that you mentioned that you wish you could be more consistent with goals I have for myself means you're one step closer to achieving that, because you're able to acknowledge and come up with something that you are hoping for and planning for. So the first step is definitely to acknowledge, like, something that you want to work towards, and how you want to redefine yourself. So you're definitely doing amazing, and you're one step closer to getting that wish that you put into the chat.
So something else just coming up for me. I'm looking at Rose's comment. She says, I admire hardworking individuals. I admire humble and kind people. I admire people who set goals and accomplish them. And this just reminded me of something that my mentor taught me. And that is that we tend to actually see qualities in other people that we already have. And so I want to bring that out right now, is that if you can think of other things things that you admire in other people, I want you to know that that indicates that you actually already have those qualities. And that's why you can see them, because you understand them. And so you might not feel that way, right? We might be like, oh, look at so-and-so, I admire this about her, or I admire this about him. I want you to take a second. What if you already have those qualities? And what if you just need to nurture them? What if you need to recognize them, acknowledge them, nurture them, bring them out more, believe that about yourself? What would that do? How would that change the way that you show up on a regular basis?
Yeah, I love that, and that's so empowering to think about.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, so, this whole discussion of identity is related to something else. And this goes back to the kind of broader categories of culture and, collective. But that is belonging, right? So I feel like we all come into the world needing a sense of belonging, right? Like when you're a baby, you need to feel safe and like you belong inside your family with your parents. You need that sense of safety. And that's really what belonging is. It's like it's a sense of safety. And so, we as Muslim women can be challenged. This can be really challenging sometimes, right? Because we out in the world, at least, right, in the broader community where, the majority may not be Muslim, that may start to challenge our sense of belonging, or especially if we're an immigrant, right? Maybe we are not someone who's not so familiar with the English language. Like there's so many different levels and layers that can make us feel like we don't belong in certain spaces. And so, Muslim women are often kind of otherized. We're like the other in many ways, especially if we're, openly identifying as a Muslim through, wearing hijab, or maybe, our appearance based on our ethnicity. And based on the different environments that we move into, that can impact our sense of belonging. So we might feel fine when we're in our home with our family, but then once you step out the door, you start to question, whether or not you belong. And you have that kind of uneasy feeling. So if you guys have ever felt that, let us know in the chat.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how different spaces can impact our sense of belonging, and different environments. Like for example, I was talking to Danielle about this, about something that happens, often at our New York State Muslim Center. Sometimes we have different religions come in and observe Jummah, and just be at the center to observe, to learn more about Islam. So recently we had Christians come in from a different group, from out of state, and they came in and they were at Jummah. And I was talking to them, and it was so interesting because when you're talking to each other, we have the same values. We have, we dress similar. We cover our head. We dress very modest. We cover all of our skin, and just connecting with each other just felt amazing and powerful because we had the same values. We were both curious. We both believe in God, and we both connect to God, and we both want to please Him. But as soon as you step out those doors and you come down the stairs and you're on the sidewalk, the way the world looks at us is completely different. They're when the world looks at them and it's more accepting, it's more, they're not otherized. And then, but when the other Muslims are coming out the masjid, we're otherized. We're looked at differently, and there's stereotypes about us. But in the space, in the masjid, we connected so much. We were on the same level. There was no otherization. We in that space, we were one. We were connected. But as soon as you leave that space and you're out into the public, into the sidewalk, it becomes completely different identities, and different. We're looked at differently. So it makes me wonder, like, is it just a space, like, or is it us? Like, are we internalizing their stereotypes so much that when we are in this public space, we feel different, we feel otherized. So how can we dig deep and remove those those feelings and feel more empowered so that we don't feel otherized or different when we run on that sidewalk, and we still feel connected. We still feel that same feeling of being one, like we were in the masjid, in the safe space.
That's so fascinating. I want to kind of draw that out a little bit more. So, like, I'm imagining, you on the inside of the masjid, like inside the walls, having this
Yeah.
conversation with this person, and you're connecting. Really, what you're kind of doing is connecting on that personal level, right? It's Farah and Sarah, for example, right? It's just
Yeah.
you two. And then you have what it points to is that we have a certain awareness of the external environment, right? You're aware of who you're with and maybe their opinions, their body language, the language they're using, the tone of voice they're using, and you're tuning in to so many different things. And that is also impacting, it's like from the outside in impact. And then just
Yeah.
by stepping through a door, from one side of the walls to the other, your sense of where you are, how the people around you will view you, what their thoughts may be about you, begins to impact maybe the way that you're showing up, right? And that could change, you might change your actions based on that, right? The way that you talked within the walls, you might have been like relaxed, comfortable, at ease, laughing, smiling. And then perhaps on the other side of those walls, you may be showing up in a completely different way. Maybe your whole body might stiffen up, you may
Exactly.
walk differently, right? Like it's really incredible how the thing I think is important about this piece is like just pointing out the fact that in any given moment, right, we're paying attention subconsciously to so many different bits of information, right? We're aware of our environment. We're aware of the people in our environment. We're making judgment calls about what other people in our environment are thinking and feeling and believing about us. And that is going to
Exactly.
impact potentially how we talk, how we walk, what words we use, whether or not we, stick up for something, whether or not we express ourselves.
Yeah. So, and imagine, like, if you're in the situation, all the everyone that's viewing this, and if you felt something similar, imagine if you stepped out the door and you just continued doing the same thing. Like, imagine, what if you felt confident? What if you felt empowered and didn't think about the stereotypes, and you just continued, and there was no doors, there was no figurative doors, and you just continued the same feeling, the same conversation, the same body language because you felt confident and empowered, and your personal identity became someone that is empowered and confident of being a Muslim American woman, and you didn't let the other categories of identity affect you and dictate how you how you behaved outside of those walls, and you became someone completely confident and empowered. So imagine on the flip side that you didn't think about the stereotypes, you didn't think about the other social groups or social identities or collective identities. You just focused on your personal identity of being empowered and strong in your faith, in your culture, in where you are, and that so then you could continue the conversation with anyone, and it didn't matter who you were talking to or who you're with or where you are.
Yeah. And so on this topic of belonging, I want to ask the audience now, where do you feel like you belong most? Where do you feel the most comfortable? And where do you feel the most uncomfortable? And start to reflect on those questions, right? Because that's going to kind of give you a sense of what's going on and where are those feelings coming from. So if it's like what we were just discussing, like on the inside of a certain space, you feel, at ease, comfortable, and able to be yourself. But on the outside of those walls, maybe not so much. Like what's going on there? And what it's pointing to is that oftentimes it's pointing to the fact that we're often taking and building our own self-esteem and confidence based on other people's opinions. And what's really amazing about that is that we often don't actually know what other people's opinions are, So it's actually still happening inside our own head, right? So like if we're worried about like, oh, they might think this of me or they might think that. Maybe they were watching the news yesterday and they think I'm oppressed, or maybe they were watching the news yesterday and they think I'm dangerous, right? Like that is still all happening inside our own heads. And so that's why, really getting a strong sense of who you want to be, who you're becoming, right, will make such a powerful difference. Because if you know who you are, right, no matter what space you kind of walk into, you're going to keep showing up as yourself.
Exactly. And that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thought to have. And it's so empowering to always show up as our authentic self and not be defined by these labels, these other opinions, and remove that box. Because being in a box is limiting, and it shrinks us to just be defined as one thing. And we are multi-layered, so we should embrace all of those layers.
Yeah, so true. And I love all these comments. I want to thank you guys in the audience for your comments and being so so open and so interactive today. You guys have shared so many beautiful insights and thoughts about yourselves, about who you want to be. It's really beautiful. So further kind of going down this road about belonging and identity, I wanted to talk about something which I think is really an important, again, like kind of foundation for creating your identity, but more so in regards to how you relate to yourself and other people. So that's vulnerability. So vulnerability is like, when you're willing to when you're willing to really get uncomfortable, to be yourself, right? Even if it's maybe not going to be acceptable to someone on the outside, right? And it's funny because there's a paradox. Like when we have relationships with people, we are attracted and we trust people who are vulnerable with us. So think about your own relationships. Like if somebody that you're with, a friend or a family member, if they open up to you, right? And if they're really honest about what they're feeling, about what they're going through, about maybe their weaknesses, their fears, right? How does that make you feel in relationship to them? Oftentimes it makes us feel closer, right?
Yeah, 100%.
For sure. But then on the other side, when it comes to ourselves, we're often very hesitant to be open and share, right? So in the audience, I wonder if you think about this, right? Where do you stand? Where are you on the spectrum? Are you super willing to be vulnerable and open? And even if you are, like, is that only in certain contexts? Like when and where, And then, or are you more kind of closed off and like you appreciate vulnerability in other people, but maybe you're not so comfortable with being vulnerable yourself.
And why? You know, it's so important to think, what is stopping us? What is limiting us from that vulnerability? And has it
Exactly.
is someone, like, has it ourselves, or do you feel like it's external pressures or expectations that has led to us being limited in our vulnerability?
Yeah. I think it's often driven by a fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fear of not being enough.
Yeah, 100%.
And
And
the mhm.
feeling like you're not enough is so it really reduces us and chips away at all the layers and potential that we have.
Yeah. And so that fear of being not enough, right, that prevents us from maybe sharing about ourselves because we're afraid of how that will be perceived. Is it good enough? The problem with kind of numbing that vulnerability is that you can't only numb one emotion. So
Yeah,
when we're trying to numb that fear, when we're trying to numb vulnerability, it ends up actually reducing how much we can feel happiness and how much we can feel joy. And so we don't realize it, but by holding ourselves back, we're actually overall reducing our experience of life, which is going to reduce our life satisfaction.
exactly. Because, well, this is the Muslim woman wellness podcast, so um, the essence of wellness and living lives filled with wellness is being vulnerable and being our authentic self and feeling empowered and confident um, to embrace all of the layers that make us who we are, to embrace all of our identities, and to not be restricted by fear or external pressures or external expectations. And and that is how we thrive as Muslim women and live with wellness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm seeing some great comments here. So Maimuna was saying that she feels at ease when she's with like-minded people. So
Mm-hmm.
you're definitely not alone there, right? Don't we all? And then she said that she feels less comfortable with people who are more successful financially, which is a great point, right? So this is just highlighting one aspect of kind of how we look at other people sometimes, right? Like, okay, so people who are more successful financially, how do you feel in that room, right? And where is that coming from? So if we're feeling less comfortable, that's an indication that there's work to do around this concept of identity.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at as well, like, so remember we talked about in the beginning how having a strong sense of self, having a strong sense of our identities protects against external influence, but it also protects against a negative self evaluation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So just noticing, and so Maimuna was so willing to share that with us, and I'm sure she's not alone. I'm sure many of us have felt that way in certain rooms, and it's amazing because it's just showing us there's a little friction here, and so we can actually begin to work around that concept. Like, what is my self concept that makes me feel uncomfortable in this certain situation? What do I think about these other people, and how am I actually viewing myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's useful oftentimes to try to understand where our sense of self is coming from. So you might go back to, like, your childhood and think of the ways that people modeled for you. For example, if it's regarding like financial status, what did your grandmother say about money? What did your parents say about money? Did they model that, money is very limited, or that it's only available to certain people, right? It's not something that
Mm-hmm.
everyone can have, or that it requires like excessive hard work and that's the only way to get it, or when it comes in it immediately goes out, right? What kind of things were modeled for you? What kind of ideas and beliefs have you kind of absorbed that are now coming out in ways where you feel uncomfortable in certain rooms, right? Or you feel like you're not sort of worthy to be in certain people's company or in certain places or professions, or the list goes on. And what we're trying, I hope that we're expressing here, and I'd love to hear back as well in the comments again, like, are you guys getting the sense that this is something that's fluid, that's malleable, that you can actually create? Do you believe, like, how close are you to believing that you can change and kind of forge your own identity and craft it, intentionally?
And again, also, like, what's stopping you? What is holding you back? And Danielle mentioned, the fear of being vulnerable and these external pressures and expectations. But if you could put that into words, what exactly is like stopping you? What external pressure is stopping you? Or have you been told for, all your life? Like, what words have been told to you? What opinions have been given to you? What identity has been given to you? Who created these identities for you? And what is stopping you from crafting it and redefining it? Would love to know in the comments. You can just put any words that come to your mind, any kind of opinions that you've been told, or external pressures or expectations, or societal norms or cultural norms, religious norms that you've been told and you've internalized and thought this is the norm to follow. We'd love to know more.
So this is just coming to my mind. I think we have time for this, but I wanted to tell a story about an experience I had once during Ramadan, going into a masjid. But I'd like to kind of flip it and ask you guys, so Farah, you and inshallah the audience as well, like,
Yeah.
what are some different ways I could have responded to this? Like, because now it's years later, like, I have my own thoughts, and I'm like, oh, if I could go back to that instance, I would do it completely differently. But I'm going to tell you guys the story, and it's kind of highlighting how we sometimes feel like we don't belong in certain spaces, and then we react to that feeling of, being rejected or not belonging, and how that impacts then our experience. And so listen to the story, and I want you guys to think, like, what could I have done to sort of change the outcome here? Okay? All right. So once, years ago in Ramadan, I was fasting. It was Ramadan. We stopped at a masjid just to pray Maghrib. So it was, time to break the fast. And, being a convert, I've always had kind of a pretty ideal view of how, Muslims behave, and like what it's like to be part of the Muslim ummah. And, even down the road, 20 years or so, like it still impacts me. That idea that like Muslims are going to be very like welcoming, and we have this beautiful sisterhood, and it's always going to be that way, But I walk into the masjid, it's time to break the fast. And so I'm kind of looking for, okay, where are the dates? Where's the water? And I find a space where there are a bunch of women sitting at tables, ready to break their fast. And there was a chair open. And as I walked towards the chair, the woman sitting next to it turned around and kind of shooed me away because she was saving the chair for herself. And there was literally nowhere else to sit. And in this particular space, all of the women were speaking Arabic. I'm not fluent in conversational Arabic. And in that moment, I felt really rejected, and I felt like I didn't belong. And so in that moment, my response was to leave the room and go into a different space by myself. And I actually cried. I felt really hurt. I felt rejected. And it really impacted, my behavior from that moment on. Like, I went in the room by myself. I don't even remember if I had anything to break my fast with. But I, prayed, and then I left the masjid with this horrible feeling. And so now, obviously, I can look back and think how I could have definitely thought about that instance in a very different way, how I could have behaved in a very different way. But I'm curious for you guys in the audience, and Farah, if you have any insight to share, like what could I have done differently to kind of shift that feeling from, a feeling of not belonging and rejection to something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a reflective story of that many people have experienced. And first of all, I'm so sorry you went through that and felt hurt in that moment. But it's definitely interesting. It's definitely interesting to know that there's a lot of masjids that have these different, like, communities. There's different, like, there's a lot of different masjids that have different communities, and sometimes when a new person comes in, it can be it could be seen as maybe they're not ready to include this person, or maybe they're not ready to have someone from a different culture, because this was a cultural community, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that's what I think about it later. I'm like, okay, they're probably all from a similar culture. Obviously, all spoke the same language, so that was a moment of, that was a way of connecting them all together. Maybe there were even smaller, like, friend groups that were waiting for one another. Maybe that chair was
Yeah.
saved for somebody's friend. But I definitely, now looking back, I think, well, especially in the context of what we've been talking about, right? Like how you can feel like an other being a Muslim in this society. Now add to that like an ethnic difference or a linguistic difference. So now imagine if in the broader society you don't speak, the language isn't your first language. Like if English is not
Right.
your first language, your whole experience has been in a different culture, in a different land, right? And now you're kind of transplanted here. And then there are people like you, right, that speak your language, that understand your culture, that get you, right? You're going to
Yeah.
gravitate towards them. You're going to feel safe
Yeah.
and comfortable amongst them. And so, first of all, instead of feeling like, oh, they rejected me, how could they, why would they do that to me, poor me, I think about it now in a different way of like, here were a group of people that were really enjoying being amongst people who get them. You know,
Yeah.
they were just so involved in it, and like immersed in that experience of that sense of having that sense of belonging, having that sense of being understood. And that's not something, that's not a bad thing. So I feel like in the beginning, especially when I was a new Muslim, I experienced a lot of things like that as well, where I
Yeah.
walk into spaces and really just feel like I don't belong. But now I get it, on a different level. And when I think about how I could have shown up differently, I could have, first of all, like all of the thoughts, the reason I felt sad in that moment were because of my own thoughts. It's not because of what anybody said or did. It was because of my own thoughts and my feelings of being rejected or feeling like I didn't belong, right? Feeling like I was
Yeah.
unwanted. All of that's happening inside my head. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily true. I didn't have a conversation with the woman to find out. You know what I mean? So oftentimes when we don't feel like we belong, I'm just trying to highlight that it's really happening in our own heads to a large degree. Because how do I know if I had, said, oh, Salam alaikum, my name's Danielle. What's your name? Right? Like, are you saving this chair for your friend? Like, I could have started a conversation with her, right? I didn't have to turn around and go leave and feel sorry for myself on the other side of the door.
I
So,
know. But in that moment, it's so, sometimes it's so hard for us to, think deeper, or reflect, because, and this happens so often with us, that sometimes we're so, we internalize so much that it's hard for us to, look deeper, and think deeply about the other people and what they may be going through, because sometimes we just focus on our thoughts and emotions, and it becomes so loud that we cannot reduce the volume and think and incorporate someone else's opinions, or their feelings, and their experiences.
yeah.
Sometimes we have to connect, connect. Sometimes we have a personal identity, and another person has a personal identity, and it's hard to sometimes bring those two together, because we're focusing on other factors, like their cultural identity, and our personal identity, and it's like, there's friction, and it's not able to connect. So sometimes that happens so often,
It does.
and it's not your fault.
Yeah, I know. It is kind of our go-to way of functioning, right? But that's
Yeah.
why I think it's so important. And I love that we're bringing this out in this episode today, but in future podcasts as well, inshallah, like how we have so much control over our experience of other people and the world.
Exactly. And I think this example, this story, is some since it happens so often. It's a way for us to reflect, and also be mindful of, in the moment. How can we how can we, how can we focus on our feelings, but also, think about and reflect on another way we can change that moment and be mindful of what's going on around us and the other identities around us and how we can connect to those identities and find different ways of sparking conversation, like you mentioned. And,
Yeah, and I
Yeah, and
think
I think it
do I
do I
sound
sound
fine?
fine?
Because my
Because
voice
my voice
started sounding
started sounding
strange to
strange
me.
to me.
yes, you're good.
Okay,
Okay,
so
Is
I'm
my
gonna
voice
keep
good?
keep
going.
going.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks. So
so
I
I
think that
think
the
that the
solution for
solution for
this
this
is
is
in
in
exactly
exactly
where it
where it
started.
started.
And that
And
is
that
that
is
if
that
you
if
have
you
a
have a
strong
strong
sense of
sense of
self,
self,
and if
and
you're
if you're
willing to craft an identity that you want to move towards, it will give you enough sturdiness, strength, and groundedness that regardless of what room you step into and how other people respond to you, you're going to be okay. You're going to be confident. It's like having your feet rooted down into the ground, kind of knowing who you are, right? That's the difference between walking to a room and feeling, really down and impacted by being sort of like rejected, turned away, or, feeling the sense of not belonging. Like, if you know who you are, I think it's possible to move into almost any space and kind of withstand, to be really resilient against whatever is happening to you on the outside.
And that comes back to, the purpose of talking about identity and the purpose of redefining our identities and crafting, because it comes back to our wellness and making sure that, it doesn't matter what space we are, it doesn't matter who we're with, what we're doing, when we craft our identity and have that sense of belonging to ourselves and belonging to any space, because we're confident and we feel empowered with who we are and all of our layers of identity, then we're able to be successful in any space that we are, and we're able to be vulnerable and feel safe. So I think it's so important that we're able to redefine and craft new identities for ourselves and remove all the boxes that we've been put in for so long, for so many years. Just removing that box and coming out of that box and stepping out and being uncomfortable with stepping out, but knowing that ultimately it's for our wellness and for our long-term well-being.
And I think the ultimate well-being as well, because you mentioned that, you mentioned belonging to ourselves. And I love that phrase and that idea, because we're often looking for a sort of acceptance on the outside, right? I think that's what causes a lot of the issues, right? But when you kind of believe in yourself, you belong to yourself, that's incredibly powerful. And then as Muslims, we have a much, bigger, deeper aspect to all of this, which is like, believing in God, our creator, Allah, that he's the one who created us and he's the one whose pleasure we're actually seeking in life. And that gives like such an even, the deepest level of groundedness that we could have. So I think that's something really important as well. Like, if when we feel like when we feel unstable, when we feel kind of like a leaf in the wind, like other people's words or actions kind of push us this way and that way, it's really going back to the deepest levels of what matters and the deepest levels of purpose. And so when it comes to defining our identity, right, the purpose, like our own purpose in life, what is going to be a piece of that defining factor, and probably the one that's kind of like everything else goes back to it, right?
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you highlighted our belonging to Allah and going back to it and using that as our core and the center of what makes of how we feel and about ourselves. And we all have this innate feeling of be belonging, and we all have this sense of belonging. We want to feel seen, heard, connected, and usually that means being seen, heard, connected to family, friends, communities, external factors. But once we remind ourselves that Allah gave us that need for belonging, and we return back to Allah and remember that we have a sense of belonging to Him, that really helps us to kind of drown out any outside noise and any white noise that is around us that is causing pressure, or causing confusion, or help giving us identity crisis. When we remember that our sense of belonging is to Allah, and that He created that sense of belonging, and He wants us to feel it, to feel it every day for Him, and to remember that, then it really empowers us and helps us with our confidence.
For sure. So now that we talked about identity, and you guys have started to think about who you want to be, the idea that we have control over this, that there's something that we can craft, that it's possible to reframe our sense of identity and to shift it. So, for example, if you have, sentences about yourself that have come up for you today, like, I'm just a stay-at-home mom, or I'm just a student, or I'm a person who, doesn't make much money. I'm just a woman. Like, if you have these kind of disempowering versions of identity that exist for you, then, today's our opportunity to begin to shift that. And inshallah, by the end of the episode, we're going to be crafting a new identity sentence that you can use to kind of remind yourself of who you are becoming on a regular basis.
Inshallah. So that brings us to our activity of this episode. So for now, we'd love if you can get a piece of paper, just anything to write on. It could be any kind of paper, anything you have nearby you, just paper and a pen. And we will be working on this 3 circles audit. So as Danielle mentioned, in the end of this episode, we hope that we can help you and support you with crafting a new identity and redefining who you are, and living authenticity. So to do that, we want you to draw 3 circles. So it's on the screen. Let us know if you're able to see that, but it's on the screen, the 3 circles. So there's 1 on the top and 2 at the bottom. You could also draw 2 on the top, 1 at the bottom. It doesn't matter, as long as you have 3 circles kind of interlapping and connecting. So 1 circle is going to be culture, 1 circle is going to be religion, and 1 circle is going to be values. Because that's usually the 3 kind of identities that we live by, that follow us throughout our lives, especially being Muslim women, Muslim American women. These are kind of the 3 circles, 3 identities that would follow us, and that are usually that we feel more connected to. So culture, religion, values. So if you can let us know in the chat once you are able to draw that. So once again, please just grab anything, pen and paper, and draw these 3 circles. So the purpose of this activity is for us to really reflect and understand how these 3 circles how these 3 identities, culture, religion, values, can really connect, and how they overlapped, and how there's friction, and what is causing these friction. And some examples of culture involves languages spoken at home or in your community. It can involve like traditional foods you love, any kind of like art or fashion from your culture, any kind of cultural traditions or holidays, any customs, just anything relating to your culture that you think is important to you, and that you really that you live by, and that you've been living by for your entire life. And then for religion, that could be any beliefs and practices that you follow, any kind of moral or ethical guidance from your faith, any kind of connections you have to it, anything that holds meaning, such as Quranic verses, religious texts, hadiths, any kind of teachings or lessons that you like to think about, or that shape who you are. You could put all of that in religion. And then for values, this can be any kind of principles you live by, such as honesty, compassion. Some of you mentioned these in the comments, um, or any kind of life priorities you have, how you want to treat others, any kind of personal goals you have, any kind of things that you admire. I remember someone mentioned that they admire they had yeah, in the comments they mentioned that they might admire hardworking individuals, and I admire humble and kind people. I admire people who set goals and accomplish them. So this can be all part of your values. So I'll give you some time to write all of that. And remember, one is culture, religion, and values. So would love to see, what you guys come up with. So just take some time to write that. And, as you're going through this activity, we're going to be thinking about, where do these circles overlap? For example, like, does your cultural background influence your values or how you practice your religion? Is there any overlap there? Are there parts of the circle that feel more separate or less connected? And why is that? How do these aspects of identity shape how you show up in your life? How do you see this in your daily life? How do they come out? How does it influence you and shape you? And which part of your identity do you want to honor more fully? Which one do you want to exemplify more fully? Which one do you want to use as a way to craft your new identity and redefine who you are? So definitely, if you're able to, please work on this activity, and we'll give you like a minute or two, and then go from there.
Yeah, and I think looking here, are there any conflicting bits of your identity that are popping out, right? Anything coming up for you where it seems like there's incongruence, either between your values and maybe something you're doing outside in the world, right? Like maybe, based on your faith, you believe certain things are really important, but then maybe in your work, you're not abiding by that, right? So you want to look for things that are conflicting, right? And also look for those things that are harmonious or that they blend together really well or they support each other. And it makes me think of some of the kind of stereotypes around being Muslim women, or like wearing hijab, especially like if someone sees you doing a sport, for example, they might say, wow, I didn't know Muslim women could do this sport,
Yeah.
or if I just saw the other day, there's a really young Muslim multimillionaire, and she does a podcast, and she was talking about her story. And, she's not what when people think of a Muslim woman, they don't necessarily think of an independent multimillionaire, 25. She was like a millionaire at 25, self-created, and that's not what people think. And so some people will not go after certain things because they don't think it's possible because of who they are, right? So if we think we're limited from certain things because we're a Muslim woman, we need to check in and look at it. Like, is it because of that's what we believe and that's our values that we want to stick to? For example, like, is it something that actually is revealed in the Quran or the Sunnah? Like the Prophet Muhammad SAW said this, that women should do this or don't do this, and I'm following it for that reason? Or am I following that? Am I doing this or not doing something because other people don't think I can because of the way they see me and their assumptions about me, right? Or the stereotypes they've created about me, which are incorrect. And so the point is like having agency over all of this, right? And being able to choose based on your most valued beliefs, right? The ones that you deeply hold, that you want to continue to hold, and that's why I think having religion as a part of this activity is important, because for many of us as Muslim women, that's going to be kind of where everything else stems from.
Exactly. And it's definitely something that shapes us. It's something we kind of think about every day, whether, as you mentioned, Danielle, whether it's like stereotypes or whether it's something like sometimes you wonder, like, are we doing the right thing? Are we practicing the right way? Are we pleasing Allah enough? And then sometimes you wonder, are we also being otherized too much? Like, do we feel unsafe? Do we feel Like we can't practice in peace because there of all these stereotypes and what others think of us. So there's so much conflict just in religion, just in that circle. So each circle has all these, sometimes these, like, these conflicts, these frictions in our culture. Like, are we enough as a cultural person? Are we doing enough, or are we doing too much? All these questions always come up.
It makes me think of a concept, because there may be certain things, for example, that we're taught in Islam, right? And then it may conflict with things that we see in the society around us. And one of those actually just came up in my family recently about traveling as a woman. We see, like, my daughter sees people, her friends, like, traveling to different countries, traveling to different states on their own, And in Islam, we have that guideline that women should travel with a mahram, not on their own, right? And there's certain guidelines around that. And so, that's something similar like that may come up for you in your circles, right? Where there's something over here like freedom, quote unquote freedom. And then over here, there's like obedience to Allah, for example, right? And so, like, in a case like that, for example, travel, there are different ways to look at it. We can say, like, oh, look, Islam is holding me back from being free, right? That's one view. And that may be a view that other people outside of us may share, right? They may be, oh, look how your religion holds you back. Look how your religion curbs your freedom, right? But there's a completely other way to look at it, right? Like, for example, in this case of travel, right? Why would a guideline like that exist, right? It's for the protection and safety, and it shows how valuable and important women are. That we're not just to be left, to sort of the wolves, right? Like, to all the problems and dangers that may happen while we're traveling. And it is demonstrating, where most people like to shift it and say, like, oh, there's something about control here, controlling women. But a completely different way to look at it is that there's so much care and love and concern for women, that we're actually protected in so many ways, So as you guys are filling in these different circles, it's a great chance for us to reflect and look at, like, how have we been seeing these conflicts or these areas of friction? Like, when we feel like there's incongruence, like, what's really going on there? And again, like, is it coming from ourselves, our own beliefs, And if we say that we are Muslim, we believe in Islam, we want to check in with that as well. Like, how much do we trust our Creator and His guidance? And how does that show up and express itself in our lives, right? And where are we finding that conflict, where we're sort of being drawn to other values and things that do not align with that, and just recognizing that we actually have a choice. And when we choose to stand firmly in the footprints of our values, like, we're deciding this is who I am and this is where I'm going to stand, that's a very, very powerful place to be.
Yeah, it's 100%. And I love that you mentioned choice. That word choice is so empowering, because we do have a choice with our identity. Once we know that we're on the path of Allah, and that we're pleasing Allah, and that we feel that sense of belonging to Him, we have a choice on how that defines us, and how much we listen to the outside world, and how much we listen to all these external societal opinions on us. And we have a choice on whether we listen to it, or whether we feel empowered and confident that we are confident that we are doing our best as Muslim women, and that we are doing our best in doing what Allah has prescribed for us and obligated for us, and we know that we're pleasing Him. So after that, we have a choice to be confident and to be empowered that we are walking on the path to Allah, and our goal is Jannah. That's why we're doing this. Our goal is paradise, and we have a purpose, we have a goal. And that's beautiful to know that we have a purpose, and to know that we have a goal, and that we're doing our best to achieve that. So that the essence of choice in redefining us is really powerful and something that we should definitely be mindful of when creating the circle and crafting our new identities.
Yeah, and it's so funny because now more in more recent years, this concept of like starting with why has become really popular. In all
Yeah.
different realms in business, like knowing your why, understanding your purpose, and how powerful that is to drive you towards success. And so, alhamdulillah,
Exactly.
we've had that all along. We've always had our understood our purpose, and sometimes we just have to kind of go back to it and check in with ourselves as well, in terms of like how strongly are we connected with our purpose, and sometimes it needs to be refreshed. And then
Yeah.
are our actions aligning with who we want to be, uh, taking that purpose into consideration. And then when there's incongruence and we're not in alignment, that's going to create so much actual friction in our lives. And when you're feeling unsatisfied, when you're feeling like things aren't working out for you, like you can't get anything right, this is actually where you need to kind of return to, like, what is my why? What is my purpose?
Yeah.
What am I doing all of this for? Right? Where am I headed? And then what in my life is not aligning with that? And once you start to kind of draw those things into that circle of who you are, right, and who you're becoming, everything is going to feel so much more effortless. It's going to feel, you're going to have so much more confidence, and you're going to be able to move forward so much more strongly.
Yeah, 100%. So I'd love to do a little check-in on if anyone was able to work on this. And it's completely fine if you're not able to finish it right now or if you want to work on it later. I know some of you may be driving or in class or, just taking a quick little lunch break, or you have other responsibilities going on. Completely understand. So, but we definitely, if you're not able to do it right now, we'd love and hope that you're able to do it later because this activity is for you, and it's for your wellness and for your future.
Yeah, and now we're going to kind of bring it all together. So we've been through so many different concepts regarding identity, and talked about how important it is to craft our own identity to live into. And so now we're going to give you an opportunity to create a sentence that defines your whole identity. So if you think of yourself like in totality as a whole person, and that could be used in the categories that Farah explained in the beginning, the personal, collective, social, and
Mm-hmm.
beyond. Maybe it's all of those. Maybe it's from your three circles activity. And, taking a look at that, if you were to define yourself you can be ideal, right? You can define yourself in an ideal way, thinking about who you want to be. Create a sentence that kind of takes, all aspects of you into consideration, but is concise at the same time. And then have that sentence, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, it's something that you can change. You have complete
Mm-hmm.
agency over that. But we would love to see your sentences. Like, how are you going to be defining yourself moving forward? So feel
Yeah.
free to post that in the chat. And then Farah, maybe we should create our own here on the spot.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay. Let me think.
Okay, I'm gonna do it
Okay. Go
just
for
on the
it.
fly. So I am, and I want to say becoming. I'm gonna say it that way, so it makes it more comfortable for me right now. So I'm
Yeah.
becoming a dedicated, sincere woman who takes action based on my belief in Islam,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm dedicated to my family, to taking responsibility for my children and their growth, and to sharing any little benefit that I've gained with others so that they can benefit too.
I love that. I think that is beautiful and kind of highlights all the beautiful parts of you and of who you want to become. So I will definitely piggyback off of that and add on to that. And for my sentence, I will say that I will use the word, I'll use the word plan, because it is a plan I have, and I want to be more actionable, where I, set time to make sure this happens, and reframe my thoughts and my actions and behaviors to become this person and become this identity. So I think I'm going to use the word plan as a way to be more actionable for myself and be more accountable for myself. So I think I'm going to say that I plan on being a source of goodness and a source of empowerment for myself and my family members and my coworkers and my friends, just anyone in my community. So I plan on being a source of goodness and of empowerment for myself and others, and see good in others also, and see good in everything around me, in order to bring myself peace and peace within myself, and also to live the best version of myself that is pleasing to Allah, but also comfortable and safe wherever I go.
I love that.
So I know that's a mouthful.
It's hard to get it down into like a short sentence, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that's completely fine,
Yep. I love what in yours was embodying that concept of growth. Like really, yes. What I get from your sentence is like, I believe I can continue to grow and become better and to give back.
Yes.
And so exactly. I think that kind of sums it up. In the comments, I see one that about being in peace with myself, with the world, and enjoying the journey the way it is. No need to be perfect. I just love that she included that last part, no need to be perfect. Yeah. That's something I've seen really, really holding back so many women, is this perfectionism. Mm-hmm. So I love that you included that. Now imagine if someone is a perfectionist and then they have a sentence like this, an identity sentence, that includes that there's no need to be perfect, and they remind themselves of that every single day. How will things change?
Exactly. That is empowering and redefining their version of perfect. Sometimes in our culture, in our religion, in being a woman, being our social identities as being a mom, a teacher, a nurse, someone mentioned earlier, just being a professional person, in all of our identities, sometimes that pressure of being perfect is put on us. And that shapes us and that defines us, of always striving to be perfect. But I love that Ruby said that there is no need to be perfect. As long as you're trying your best and being at peace with yourself, that you are, and knowing that you're trying your best to live your authentic self, sometimes is enough sometimes.
Yep. Awesome. So as we kind of wrap up here, keep feeling free to share your sentences in the chat, and also let us know, what are you taking away from this episode? Yes.
And when you've got your sentence, we would also be grateful and love to see if you can take a picture of your 3 circles activity and comment on this video with hashtag Identity Blueprint Podcast. And we might feature it in a next episode. So once again, you could just take a picture of your 3 circles activity and add your sentence, your sentence that redefines you and your new identity, and hashtag Identity Blueprint Podcast. And then we might feature this in a future episode, inshallah. And remember, it does not have to be perfect. and you don't have to be fully comfortable with it right now. It doesn't have to be. It is this sentence does not define you. This is a sentence we're working towards, and working to always grow and improve over time. So we'd love to see that in the comments on this video, and then inshallah we can look at it for the next episode and hopefully feature it.
Awesome. And I just want to leave you everyone with a quote. This is from Brene Brown. And she says, when you belong to yourself, you belong anywhere.
I love that. MashaAllah. So we hope this episode brought you closer to redefining who you are and living your authentic self and outside of those boxes that you've been put in for too long. And we'd love to invite you to comment, subscribe, and stay updated with future episodes. And just a little preview for our next episode, inshallah, is that we'll be discussing the confidence code and overcoming the minority mindset. So how do I own my own space and voice when I'm often the only one in the room, the only Muslim, the only woman of color, or the only one wearing a hijab? How can we overcome this minority mindset and become more confident? And this is kind of like a little continuation of the episode today, and digging a little bit more deeper in becoming more confident. So we hope you're all able to tune in.
Inshallah. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for your participation. And inshallah, we'll see you next time.
Inshallah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.